It's time once again to answer your questions in episode 2 of NHL Q&A. You guys asked the questions, I've got my answers. Let's get started. Hey everybody, it is time for episode 2 of NHL Q&A, where I will be answering 5 more of your NHL related questions that you guys asked on the community tab post. Thank you to everybody who asked a question. If I don't get to yours in this video, keep asking every time we do this, because I'm going to try and get different questions from different people for each episode. And I'd certainly like to keep doing this at least once a month. Don't be discouraged. Keep them coming for the next episode. But let's get into it now, starting with question number 1. This comes from Brian, who asks, now that the Islanders have everyone back and have games in hand, do you think they can climb out of their hole and clinch a wild card spot? Man, the Islanders are on a deep, deep hole at this point. And yes, they do have games in hand. They've had a lot of postponements. They're going to be playing a lot of hockey to finish out the season the rest of the way, but I feel personally like this is just too big of a hole to climb out of. It's certainly not impossible, but the Islanders right now have only played 28 games, which is a very, very low number. I believe that's the lowest in the league, but they only have 26 points. And as we talked about throughout the year and earlier in episode 1 of this series, generally, the cutoff line for the final wildcard spot is somewhere around 95-ish points. Sometimes it's a little lower than that. Sometimes it can get a little above that. But if you got to think that, they got to get to 95 points to get into the playoffs, they only have 26 right now. So, they need almost another 70 points to get into the playoffs. Now, obviously, they've only played 28 games, so they do have a lot of games left, but they would have to win such a large majority of their remaining games that that's going to be really, really difficult to do. And not only that, but they would need somebody who is in a playoff spot right now, whether that's Boston or Pittsburgh, who are in the wild card spots, or another team from their division like Washington, New York, or Carolina, who's in a top 3 spot right now. Somebody would have to fall way back and basically collapse in the second half of the season for the Islanders to be able to move up and take that spot. Right now, Boston is in the final wild card spot with 38 points through 31 games. The Islanders have 3 games in hand on the Bruins, but they would need to make up 12 points to get into that final wild card spot. I just don't think that's going to happen personally, and unfortunately, I think that the Islanders are not going to be a playoff team this year. Question number 2 comes from Always Hockey. Austin asks, how do you see the Leafs to progress this season with an outstanding record in the last month, outscoring opponents 97-55, and what do you think is going to happen to Montreal? All right, so 2-part question here. We'll start with the Leafs. Obviously, Toronto is having a phenomenal season this year. They're one of the top teams in the NHL. When you look at point percentage, they've been just awesome all season long, especially, really, really good the last 4 to 6 weeks. They're one of the top teams in the East. They're certainly going to be a playoff team this year. And I see no reason why the Leafs can't continue the way that they're playing right now. And one of the biggest reasons for that, I think, is their goaltending. Jack Campbell is a legitimate Vezina Trophy candidate this year. The Leafs haven't gotten goaltending like this in a long, long time. Certainly not in the last decade. They have not had goaltending like this. Probably the last 15 plus years. It's probably been since the early 2000s since the Leafs have even had goaltending that's remotely close to this level. When's the last time Toronto had a Vezina candidate? I was probably a little kid. So Jack Campbell, in the way that he's playing in goal, has been a massive, massive boost to this Toronto team. And we're seeing the dividends of that, and we're seeing them be one of the top teams in the NHL this season because of it. So the goaltending is huge. It makes the Leafs extremely dangerous, and they're having a phenomenal regular season. There's no question about that. You can't even argue against that. But at the end of the day, it's what they do in the playoffs that really matters. They could win the President's Trophy. They could win 60 games this year. It wouldn't matter. whatever they do in the regular season, that's great. And, obviously they have to win to get into the playoffs. But if they lose in the first round again, this is another failure for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And this whole season, no matter how many games they win in the regular season, will mean absolutely nothing if they lose in the first round of the playoffs again. I mean, this is the year where the pressure is on, where this team has to win in the postseason. After how many straight years of first round exits, they have to win a playoff series this year for this season to be even remotely successful. If they lose in the first round, this is another complete and utter failure for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So they're having a great regular season. There's no question about that. They need this to carry over into the postseason when it matters, because they have to win in the playoffs this year, or this is going to be another massive, massive failure. And I think we'd see major changes in the offseason if they're not able to win a round this year. Just year after year of first round exit, just making the playoffs isn't good enough anymore for the Toronto Maple Leafs. They need to win in the playoffs. And if they don't do that, it doesn't matter how good they are in the regular season. So they've got to keep playing the way that they are. They've got to stay hot, and they've got to set themselves up to be playing their best hockey come postseason time, because they have to win in the postseason. As far as Montreal, they're headed for a rebuild. There's no two ways about it. They're headed for a rebuild. Jeff Gorton, who was brought in as their president of hockey ops, is a great person to have at the helm for a rebuild. He basically built the New York Rangers into what they are now and took that team through that rebuilding process. He's a great guy to have doing it in Montreal, but they are headed for a rebuild. There is no doubt about it. Question number 3 comes from Prosperous. Says, do you think the Pens will finally get past the first round this year in the playoffs? Okay, so the Pittsburgh Penguins, obviously been a great team in the Sidney Crosby era, the last 15 years or so. Been a phenomenal team. They won the Cup in 2009. They won back-to-back in 16 and 17. But they haven't won a playoff series since 2018. So 2019, they lost in the first round to the Islanders. 2020 in the bubble, they lost in the qualifier to Montreal. And then last year, they lost again to the Islanders. So this team hasn't gotten by the first round of the playoffs since 2018. Obviously, the last 3 years have been disappointing in the postseason. Pittsburgh is once again having a very good regular season. They're in a top wild card spot right now, but they are not far off from the other teams in that division ahead of them. And they just had a 10-game winning streak that really propelled them in the standings. Pittsburgh's looking very good this year. So as far as winning in the playoffs go, obviously this is tough to try and, predict out in the future, because we see it a lot in the NHL where teams are very good in the regular season and then they just crap the bed in the playoffs. And it happens actually pretty often in the NHL. Just last year, Pittsburgh did that. They were the 1 seed in the East, and then they lost to a wild card Islanders team in the first round. The Florida Panthers were a 2 seed in the Central, and they lost in the first round. If we look up in the North Division, Toronto last year in the playoffs were a 1 seed going in and lost in the first round. So it's not uncommon for teams that have very good regular seasons to lose it in the playoffs and end up getting knocked out early. And unfortunately, that's been happening to Pittsburgh. But I will say this. Something seems different about this Pittsburgh Penguins team. This year's team, there's just something different about them. Their attitude, it feels like they're playing with more of a sense of urgency, more of a chip on their shoulder. And maybe this is just kind of recency bias, because I've been watching them on this 10-game win streak that they just had, and they were really just playing so well and ripping through opponents. So this might be a little bit of recency bias, but I feel like this year's Pens team is just a little bit different than what we've seen for the past couple of years. I feel like the past couple of years, the teams were just a little lackadaisical, a little bit, kind of having this, we're the Pittsburgh Penguins, we're always a good team. They didn't really have to be 100% locked in, and they thought they were just going to win, and it didn't happen. This year's team, I feel like, has gotten rid of that lackadaisical attitude and has got a real chip on their shoulder and has a sense of urgency and is like, no, we're going to find ways to win. And that's what what this team's done this year, is they found ways to win better than I think, the teams of the last few years have done. And I just feel like they're going to be a different team heading into the playoffs. The other thing is Tristan Jarry, who obviously was clowned for the way that he played in the playoffs last year. High glove side every time. Yeah, it wasn't a good postseason for him last year, but he's bounced back from that and has played extremely well this season. Honestly, is in the Vezina conversation with his numbers so far this year. And that's a huge difference for the Pittsburgh Penguins. If the Tristan Jarry that we are seeing in the first half of this year shows up for the playoffs, it is not going to be the Tristan Jarry that we saw in the playoffs last year. And Pittsburgh is going to have a much better chance of winning. So it's hard to say if they're going to win. No matter who they play in the first round, it's going to be a really tough matchup because all the teams in the East that are making the playoffs are capable of winning. Every matchup in the Eastern Conference in the postseason this year is going to be a very tough matchup. But this year's Penguins team has a little bit something different than I haven't seen from them in the past couple years. And I think that gives them a chance to really try and make a run this year. Question number 4 comes from Yoshi Bros. It says, with the Oilers losing 5 straight games in a row, will they be able to make a move before the trade deadline in finding a goaltender to help their goaltending issue? So first off, goaltending is absolutely a major problem for the Edmonton Oilers. So Yoshi Bros is hitting it right on the head here with goaltending being an issue that they have to address. This team, I'm going to make this very clear. This team is going nowhere with Mikko Koskinen and Mike Smith in goal. Absolutely nowhere. Even if they do make the playoffs, they're a first-round exit with those two in goal. And they're in serious danger of not even making the playoffs. This last month to 5-6 weeks has been an absolute disaster for the Edmonton Oilers. They are in serious danger of not even making the playoffs. This team has a lot of problems. It's not just goaltending. They have a lot of issues throughout their roster, but the goaltending issue must be addressed for them to have any chance of making a run in the playoffs. Now, the problem with that is that they have no cap space. Even with LTIR relief, they have less than $1 million to work with at the trade deadline as far as current space is concerned. That means that for them to bring in a goaltender, money needs to go out, which means they're going to have to move money out of Edmonton, give up players out of Edmonton to be able to bring in a goaltender. That is not going to be an easy move to make for Ken Holland, but it is possible. There are going to be some goaltenders on the market. I fully expect the Oilers to be in the market for a goaltender because they're not going anywhere if they're not. But it's going to be a complicated kind of deal to move money around to be able to make that move. So we'll see who they have to give up and as far as getting money out of there to bring in a goaltender. But again, this team is going nowhere if they don't add a goaltender because Smith and Koskinen ain't it. Just ain't it, and aren't going to win this team anything in the playoffs. And finally, the last question here, number 5, comes from Aaron. It says, who is leading Rookie of the Year? Is it Raymond, Seider, or Zegras right now, in your opinion? This is a great question, Aaron. So, first of all, I think you're spot on with the top 3 guys. I think Lucas Raymond, Moritz Seider, and Trevor Zegras are your top 3 guys right now for the Calder. Earlier in the year, I would say, up till about 4 to 6 weeks ago, it was a clear choice for me. It was Lucas Raymond, and I actually did a video early in the season about how Lucas Raymond was the clear-cut front runner right now for Rookie of the Year. And at that point, he had a pretty good lead in that. I think he was a pretty clear favorite. He was leading rookies in goals. He was leading or tied for assists. He was leading rookies in points. Like all the major statistics that voters look at for Rookie of the Year, he was either leading, tied for first, or in the top 3 for like every major statistic. Lucas Raymond was the clear-cut favorite. Over the last 4 to 6 weeks, though, Trevor Zegras has made a huge push. And that lead for Raymond has really shrunk down to a very slim one. And Moritz Seider's had a great year as well. And, you have to look at stats a little differently because he's a defenseman and Raymond and Zegras are forwards. So you can't just take the full-on statistical approach to it. Seider's been very good as well. Personally, I think right now it's between Lucas Raymond or Trevor Zegras. And when we look at the statistics, Lucas Raymond still leads rookies in points. He's tied for first in assists, and he's second among rookies in goals. But Trevor Zegras is right behind him in goals, 1 behind him in goals, 2 behind him in assists, and 3 behind him in points. So Zegras has closed that gap immensely over the past number of weeks. And there's still a lot of hockey left to be played. I mean, we're not even to the halfway point of the season yet. This is an award that is going to be won down the stretch and in the second half of the season. But right now, I think Lucas Raymond has a slight edge, but Zegras is coming quick. And, early in the year, Zegras had a big edge. Now he has a slight edge, and Zegras is very close to catching him. Seider is also in the conversation, and kind of a dark horse that I would pay attention to in the second half of the year is Tanner Jeannot with the Nashville Predators. Another rookie having a phenomenal season. He actually leads rookies in goals now with 11, 1 more than Lucas Raymond and 2 more than Trevor Zegras. So watch out for Tanner Jeannot as well in the second half of the season. But at the end of the day, I think Raymond has a slight edge now. I think Zegras is making a strong push. And at the end of the year, it's going to come down to either Raymond or Zegras. And whoever has the better second half of the season is going to get it. But those are your questions here. Thank you to everybody who asked a question. We had some great questions for this episode, all 5 of them. So really appreciate those, guys. And again, if you didn't get your question answered and you did ask on the community tab post, just ask again next time or come up with a new question for next time. And when we do episode 3, hopefully yours will get picked as one of the ones that I answer. But I want to kind of keep it at 5 questions because I don't want these videos going like half an hour long. So we're just going to keep it to 5 questions. But don't be discouraged. Keep asking, and we're going to keep doing at least one of these a month, hopefully, through the rest of the NHL season. But thank you guys again so much. With that, like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media. All those links are down in the description. If you'd like to further support the channel, the links to our merchandise store, membership, and donations are down in the description as well. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'll talk to you guys soon.